Hi everybody. We're going to be talking a little bit more about vertex form today. We're going to be writing equations, not just graphing. But before we get started, we have to do a couple graphs. We're going to have our quiz on Tuesday, and most of the quiz is going to be, can you graph a parabola if it's written in vertex form, like the one on the left? Can you graph a parabola if it's written in standard form, like on the right? So I'll go ahead and give you guys some time to graph those. All right, now that everybody's got them graphed, I'm sure, we're going to go ahead. I'll go through these pretty quick. So we'll start with this one over here on the left that's in vertex form. So when we have vertex form, it usually has parentheses, and it tells us where the vertex is, essentially, using this number here, the -2, and this +1. We can figure out where the vertex is really easily. So let's think about this in terms of translations. This +1 means we are going up 1. This -2 in the parentheses means we're going right 2. Remember, the inside of the parentheses is always backwards, so -2 really means right 2. And then this 3 here in front of everything, that's called our A value, or I call it our steepness. That's our A value. So that's our steepness. It's 3 times steeper than a regular parabola. So let's go ahead and graph it. We're going to go ahead and we're going to go right 2, up 1. That puts our vertex right there. And then what I usually do is I kind of graph a parabola just ignoring this A value here. So normally a parabola would go right 1, up 1, because 1 squared is 1. It would go left 1, up 1, because -1 squared is also 1. Then it would go back to the vertex. We would go right 2, up 4, because 2 squared is 4. And then it would go back to the vertex, left 2, up 4, because -2 squared is also 4. So that's what our equation would look like if there was no 3 there. But since there is a 3 there, we know it's going to be 3 times steeper than what I just did. So I'm going to go ahead and graph that in now. So our vertex isn't going to move. We're just going to move the arms up. So we're going to go right 1, up, not 1, but right 1, up 3. Right there. We're going to go back to the vertex. We're going to go left 1, up 3, because it's symmetrical. We're going to go back to the vertex. We're going to go right 2, not up 4. We're going to go up 3 times faster than that. We're going to go right 2, up 12. So that's pretty high up here. Maybe something like this. If it goes off of the graph a lot, I don't really expect you to try to guess, but just make sure that you show that it's a very steep graph. And try to get, holy cow, and try to get it as best you can. Not like me. That's pretty bad. Okay. Let's go ahead and move on to the one in standard form. So we have standard form. Standard form is a little more work. It's hard to see where the vertex is. We have to use this formula. The axis of symmetry is at x equals -b divided by 2a. And I do want you to know that formula. So -b is -4. Because it's a +4, it becomes the opposite. So it's -4 divided by 2 times a is -2. So 2 times -2. So that gives us -4 divided by -4, which is 1. Remember, a negative divided by a negative is a positive. So our axis of symmetry is at x equals 1. Let's go ahead and dot that in. It's somewhere, our vertex is somewhere on this line. Let's figure out where on this line. I'm going to go ahead and erase this. So it's somewhere on this line here. Well, if x is 1, what's y? Well, this is the equation that tells us what y is if we know what x is. So I'm just going to plug it in. I usually just do it verbally. If x is 1, ready? 1 squared is 1 times -2 is -2. Plus 4 times 1 is plus 4. Plus 5. So that gives us 4 plus 5 is 9. Minus 2 is 7. So it gives us the 0.17. So 1/7's right there. And then we know it's going to be an upside down graph. It's going to be a frowny face graph because of that -2 in front. That -2 in front is the only thing that determines the shape. This stuff over here, all it does is move it left, right, up, down. So now that we've got our vertex, we can just use this -2. So our steepness is -2. It's upside down and it's twice as steep. So I'm going to go right 1, down 2. I'm going to go left 1, down 2 from the vertex. Then I'm going to go back to the vertex. I'm going to go right 2, down, not 4, but down 8. I'm going to go back to the vertex. I'm going to go left 2, down, not 4, but down 8, because it's twice as steep and it's upside down. So notice how I did that entire parabola without using a table. And if you guys can do that, go ahead and do it. But if you need to double check with the table, that's great. One really easy point to always get if you are using a table, and just to double check yourself, is your y-intercept here is, in this case, 0, 5. It's always going to be 0, comma, whatever that number is. So that's a good way to double check yourself. All right, let's move on. We're going to get away from graphing for a little bit, and we're just going to be writing equations. So it says, write an equation for a parabola with a vertex at 2, -3. Well, 2, -3 is right here. Well, let's think about this in terms of a translation. We went right 2 from the origin. We went right 2 and we went down 3. Right 2, down 3. So I'm going to go ahead and just try to write something in standard form. Y equals x, how do we go right 2? We have to minus 2 inside the parentheses, and then we have to add 3. Now notice that we don't really know what number goes in front here. We don't know if this is a happy face graph. We don't know if this is a frowny face graph. We don't know if it's really steep. We don't know if it's really, really wide. So we don't really know what that number is. Maybe our parabola just looks like a regular shape parabola. Maybe it looks like that and it has its vertex at 2, -3. Or maybe it's a really, really, really wide parabola like this maybe. And it has its vertex at 2, -3. So we don't really know what that number is. So that's why they say write an equation. It's not the only equation that it could be. It's just some old equation. So if you wrote this, this would be perfectly fine. That would be an equation of a parabola that has a vertex at 2, -3. Or you could write y equals pi x minus 2 squared plus 3. Any number in front here is good because we don't really know how steep it is. Moving on to the next one. So write an equation for a parabola with a vertex at 5, 2, and it also has another point at 7, 14. So this is something we haven't seen before. If they tell us the vertex, let's pretend this is the vertex. Before we didn't really know how steep it was. So maybe it looked like this, maybe it looked like this, but now they're telling us this other point, 714. Maybe that point 714 is right there. Well, now we know that this is not going to be right. And we also know that this is not going to be right. So there is some specific A value that's going to give us that right steepness. I'll show you how to find that. It just takes a little bit of algebra. First, what we're going to do is we're just going to write an equation. Just the equation, write it as best you can. Y equals, we don't really know what this number is, so I'm just going to write A. X minus 5, right? Because we're going right 5, and we're going up 2. Alright, so that's what we got so far. We don't really know what this A value is, and they're going to expect you to solve for it. So I'm going to go ahead, and here's what I'm going to do. It's not as hard as it sounds. I'm just going to, they told me an X and a Y that's part of this graph. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug those numbers in. This is Y, I'm going to plug it in there. This is X, I'm going to plug it in there. Then I'm going to have an equation in which the only thing that I don't know is A. And then I'm just going to solve for A, and then I'll know how steep this graph is. Check it out. So I'm going to write Y. Wait, I'm not going to write Y. I know what Y is. I'm going to write 14 equals A times, I'm not going to write X, I'm going to write 7 because X is 7. 7 minus 5 squared plus 2. Alright, now we just crunch this out. 14 equals A times 7 minus, we got to do parentheses first. 7 minus 5 is 2. So you get 2 squared plus 2. Probably don't need to write out all these steps, but we'll just do it for now. 14 equals A times 2 squared is 4. So this is really 4A plus 2. Now this is a really, really simple equation that you've probably been doing since probably 6th grade. So 14 equals 4A plus 2. We're just going to minus 2 from both sides. We'd get 12 equals 4A, and we'd get A equals 3. So now we know how steep our graph is. We know that our steepness of this graph is 3. So what we're going to do is just we're going to rewrite this equation up here. We're going to write Y equals, instead of writing A, we now know that A is 3 times X minus 5 squared plus 2. You know the exact equation of that parabola just by knowing the vertex and one other point. So we're going to do one more problem. I'm not going to go through this entire problem. Actually, I think we will. I think we have time. So it's basically the same as the previous problem. They want you to write the exact equation with just these 2 points. So they tell you the vertex, and they tell you, in this case, they tell you the y-intercept. But you might as well think of it as just some point. So let's do the same thing we did before. I'm going to write the equation as best as I can using just the vertex. So I'm going to write y equals A, because I don't really know how steep it is, x, let's see here, we got to go left 4. So that means we got to do x plus 4 in the parentheses, squared, and then down 3, minus 3. Alright, so that's a start. We just got to figure out what this A value is. So we got to figure out what that A value is. That means we got to know what these Y and these X's are. Well, we do know what the Y is and the X is at one particular point. We're just going to plug them in. 0 is going to be X, and negative 11 is Y when X is 0. So let's just plug that in. Negative 11 equals A times 0 plus 4 squared minus 3. And we're just going to solve for A. We have an entire equation here, and it's only got one variable in it. So we're just going to grind it out. Negative 11 equals A times, let's see here, 0 plus 4 is 4. 4 squared is 16. So we're going to have 16A. 16 times A. 16A minus 3. So let's see here. Then we're going to add 3 to both sides. And what's negative 11 plus 3? Negative 8 equals 16A. We'll divide both sides by 16. And we get A equals negative 8/16, which is just the same as negative a half. So this is kind of a wide parabola, and it's upside down. Now we're just going to plug that back into the beginning. Y equals negative 1/2 x plus 4 squared minus 3. So that's basically the hardest type of thing that they could ask you to do with vertex form is write an equation given 2 points, and one of them being the vertex. It's just a couple steps. It's just algebra. You don't really need to use a graph, but now we could graph this over here if we wanted to. All right, we got a few problems for homework. It's not super long. Have a great rest of your day.